Every May, when the fog rolls thick off the Pacific and traps the damp cold against the Oregon coastal range, they come. Hundreds of them, cyclists from all over the country, bright as neon targets in their spandex and Gore-Tex, ready to conquer the Cascadia Crest to Coast Enduro. 3 days, 300 miles. It starts in the jagged, snow-dusted peaks where the air is too thin to breathe and ends at the gray, churning waters of the ocean below. To the tourists, it's a triumph of human endurance. To the local chamber of commerce, it's a multi-million-dollar golden goose. But to those of us who live in the valley shadow of the Coast Range, the race has a different name. We call it the Reaping because we know what happened in 1992, and we know that every year since, the mountains take their tax. The town leaders will tell you it's just an urban legend, a ghost story cooked up by campfire cynics to scare the out-of-towners. They have to say that. Tourism pays for the paved roads and the shiny new police cruisers, but the trees don't care about tourism, and the mountains never forget a meal. The inaugural race in May of 1992 was supposed to put our small timber town of Blackwood on the map. It did, just not the way anyone wanted. The storm hit on night 2. It wasn't just rain. It was a deluge that turned the technical mountain single track into a slip and slide of slick clay and jagged shale. By midnight, dozens of riders had pulled out, huddled in emergency blankets at the checkpoints. But one rider, a fierce competitor named Marcus Vance, never made it to checkpoint 3. Marcus was a pro. He wasn't the type to miss a turn or panic in a storm. When his support team reported him missing at dawn, search and rescue deployed into the dense, old-growth timber of Whispering Ridge. Deputy Sheriff Tom Miller, who happened to be my uncle, was the one who found him. Tom told me the story only once, late at night, his hands shaking so violently he spilled his whiskey. He said the forest that morning was dead silent. No birds, no wind, just the heavy, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water falling from the canopy. He had stepped off his ATV to check a mudslide when he noticed something strange on the forest floor, a scattering of bright, anodized aluminum shards. It was a shattered bicycle wheel. A few feet away lay a crumpled frame, twisted into impossible angles, as if a giant hand had wrung it out like a wet towel. But Marcus wasn't with the bike. Tom looked up, 20 feet above the muddy forest floor. Swaying gently in the damp breeze was Marcus Vance. He was suspended from the thick horizontal bough of a massive ancient Douglas fir. He hadn't been hanged with rope. Someone, or something, had stripped the heavy, grease-blackened drive chain from his bicycle. They had wrapped it twice around Marcus's bare neck, threaded it through itself, and hoisted him up into the canopy. Tom said the most horrifying part wasn't the height or the brutality of the chain cutting deep into the throat. It was the physics of it. Marcus's shoes were missing. His toes pointed rigidly toward the earth. To get a grown man 20 feet into a tree and hang him with a bicycle chain required immense strength, or a terrifyingly unnatural agility, and there were no ladder marks, no climbing spikes, only deep, vertical gouges in the bark of the Douglas fir, like thick, blunt talons scraping their way up the trunk. When they brought Marcus down, his eyes were wide open, glazed over with terror, staring into the dark heart of the woods, and his mouth was stuffed full of damp earth. The autopsy report never saw the light of day. Within 48 hours of the discovery, the mayor, the sheriff, and the head of the tourism board held a closed-door meeting. In 1992, Blackwood was dying. The lumber mills were closing, and the Crest to Coast race was the town's only economic lifeline. If word got out that a psycho was lurking on the trails, brutally executing cyclists and hoisting them into the trees like hunting trophies, the race would be canceled permanently. The town would starve. So, the machinery of silence began to turn. Marcus Vance's death was officially ruled a freak accident. The official press release stated that Vance had lost control on a high-speed descent, struck a tree at a violent angle, and became catastrophically entangled in his own equipment and the low-hanging branches. The chain around his neck, a tragic, one-in-a-million freak entanglement during the crash. They paid off the family with a quiet, hefty settlement funded by the race's insurance policy and a memorial fund raised by local businesses. Marcus's body was cremated before an independent pathologist could look at the neck wounds, but you can't bury the truth in a small town. The paramedics talked, my Uncle Tom talked. Soon, the story mutated into a ghost story told in whispers around local bike shops and dive bars. They called the entity the Mechanic, or the Chain Stalker. Most popular is the Neck Tree Killer. The legend claimed that if you fell too far behind the pack during the second leg of the race, if you found yourself riding alone in the dark on Whispering Ridge, you would hear it. Not the wind, not an animal. You would hear the frantic metallic clicking of a freewheel hub spinning at a furious speed right behind you, and then the sound of a chain being dragged across the dirt. For 34 years, the town kept the secret, and for 34 years, the race went on. Every May, the neon riders returned, and almost every year, someone went missing. A solo rider would drop out of contact between checkpoints 2 and 3. The city would blame it on exhaustion, dehydration, or a rider simply quitting and walking off the trail. They would find their abandoned bikes weeks later, deep in the brush, usually missing the chain. The people who lived on the ridge knew better. We kept our windows locked in May. My name is Ethan. I grew up hearing my Uncle Tom's warnings, but by 2026, those warnings felt like ancient history. I was 26, arrogant, and an avid mountain biker. I didn't believe in monsters. I believed in gravity, adrenaline, and prize money. I entered the crest-to-coast enduro. By the evening of the second day, I realized my uncle hadn't been crazy. The storm hitting the ridge was an exact echo of the '92 tempest. The sky was the color of a bruised lung. Mud tore at my tires, threatening to rip the handlebars from my grip with every descent. I was running in 12th place, pushing hard through the switchbacks of Whispering Ridge as night fell. My high lumen handlebars light cut a fragile, bouncing beam through the blinding sheets of rain. The forest on either side was a wall of absolute black. Then my rear tire struck a hidden wet root. The bike washed out violently. I went flying over the bars, crashing hard into a thicket of ferns. The impact knocked the wind out of me, leaving me gasping in the mud. When I finally wiped the grit from my eyes and stood up, my bike was 10 feet away, wedged under a fallen log. The headlight was cracked, flickering weakly before dying completely. Total darkness swallowed me. I pulled out my phone. No service. The battery was draining rapidly from the cold. I was alone, miles from the next checkpoint, in the dead of night, on the worst stretch of the ridge. I dragged my bike out from under the log. The frame was intact, but when I tried to pedal, the pedals spun freely. I knelt down in the mud, feeling around the crankset. My stomach dropped. The chain was gone. It hadn't just slipped off, it had been cleanly snapped, taken right off the sprockets. That's when the wind died. The heavy downpour seemed to muffle, as if the forest was holding its breath. Then I heard it. From the darkness up the trail, a sound sliced through the gloom. Clack, clack, clack. It was the slow, deliberate sound of a bicycle freewheel hub clicking, but there was no light. No rider could navigate this terrain without a light. "Hello?" I yelled, my voice sounding small and pathetic against the massive trees. "I need a chain tool." The clicking stopped. For a long, agonizing minute, there was nothing but the sound of my own racing heart. I began to back up, dragging my useless bike by the handlebars. Then came a new sound. It wasn't a bike. It was a heavy, metallic rasp. The sound of a heavy steel chain being dragged across the wet gravel. Clink, clink. It was moving fast, and it wasn't coming from the trail, it was coming from above. I looked up into the canopy of a massive Douglas fir right beside me. In the dim, ambient gray light of the storm, I saw a shape shifting among the branches 20 feet up. It was terrifyingly long, lanky, and impossibly thin, draped in tattered, mud-caked rags that might have once been cycling gear decades ago. Its limbs bent at angles that defied human anatomy, moving with the sickening precision of an insect. Its face was a pale, hairless oval, but where the jaw should have been, the skin was stretched wide, permanently torn open into a gaping, lipless maw, and wrapped tightly around its long gray fingers was a gleaming, grease-blackened bicycle chain. The thing leaned over the branch, its hollow, pitch-black eyes locking onto mine. It let out a sound that froze the blood in my veins, a wet, guttural mimicry of a cyclist panting for breath, followed by the sharp, metallic shriek of a brake pad scraping against a spinning wheel. I dropped my bike and ran. I didn't care about the trail. I bolted blindly into the thick underbrush, branches tearing at my face and ripping my jersey. Behind me, I heard a massive thud as the entity dropped from the tree, landing heavily in the mud. What followed was a nightmare of pure adrenaline and terror. I could hear it pursuing me. It wasn't running on two legs. It was swinging through the lower branches of the Douglas firs with horrifying speed, the steel chain it carried clinking violently against the bark. Clink, clink. I tripped over a mossy root and tumbled down a steep embankment, crashing into a shallow, rocky creek. The breath exploded from my lungs. I scrambled to my feet, looking back up the ridge. The entity stood at the top of the embankment. In the flashes of lightning, I saw it clearly. Its legs were elongated, the muscles twisted and gnarled like old roots. It held the chain taut between its hands, pulling it so hard the steel links groaned. It opened its gaping mouth, and out came a voice. It wasn't its own. It was a recorded, distorted echo of a man's voice from decades ago, gasping, choking, begging, "Please, the chain. It's too tight. Please." It was Marcus Vance's final moments, preserved and played back by the thing that had harvested him. The creature lunged down the slope toward me, sliding effortlessly through the mud. I turned and sprinted down the creek bed, the water splashing around my knees. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned like fire, until my vision blurred, driven by the absolute certainty that if I slowed down, I would become the next permanent resident of the canopy. I survived. By some miracle of pure terror, I stumbled out onto a paved logging road just as a sweep vehicle was driving past. They found me hysterical, covered in mud, bleeding from dozens of lacerations. I told the sheriff everything. I screamed about the thing in the trees, about the chain, about Marcus Vance. He looked at me with cold, tired eyes. He didn't ask questions. He didn't order a search party. He just told the paramedics to sedate me and report that I had suffered a severe concussion and visual hallucinations brought on by advanced hypothermia. The next day, the race concluded. The winners stood on the podium by the ocean, spraying champagne, holding up giant cardboard checks. The local news praised another successful, lucrative year for the town of Blackwood. They found my bike a week later. The police returned it to me. The frame was fine, but the chain was missing, and carved deeply into the aluminum top tube were 3 deep vertical gouges. I moved out of the valley next month. I sold my bikes. I don't go into the woods anymore. But it's May again. The fog is rolling off the ocean, thick and heavy, crawling its way up into the mountains. Tonight, hundreds of riders are sleeping in their tents on Whispering Ridge, dreaming of the finish line, dreaming of the coast. The town leaders are smiling, counting the weekend's revenue, but out there in the dark, where the rain turns the dirt to clay and the ancient Douglas firs scrape the sky, something is climbing. It's moving through the branches, silent as a shadow, dragging 20 feet of rusted steel behind it. It's looking for the riders who fall behind. It's looking for a fresh chain. And the race. The race never ends.